There is an ancient Cherokee proverb that states, "A woman's highest calling is to connect a man to his soul so he can unite with Source. A man's highest calling is to protect a woman so she can walk the earth unharmed." This sacred proverb reminds us that true safety, honor, and alignment always begin within our closest, most intricate human connections. It is a blueprint for individual harmony, but when we fail to protect one another on that foundational level, our unhealed personal wounds ripple outward. They fracture our societies, our institutions, and our entire geopolitical landscape. We cannot engineer peace out there in the world until we first heal the war raging inside of our own souls. True change is never a political negotiation. It is a profound inside job. Today, we are pulling back the global curtain to expose how systemic shadows manifest right inside our classrooms and courtrooms, laying down an uncompromising four-pillar pact for real, lasting global peace. Welcome to episode 4. We are all souls having a human experience on earth for self-ascension purposes. There is no separation between souls from that perspective. The perception of a separate existence outside of the collective of souls on earth is what drives the perception that there is an enemy to separate from and potentially fight, rape, and kill. When we accept that our souls are having a human experience for self-expansion purposes, we can discuss how our external reality is a reflection of how we feel about ourselves internally as a constant feedback loop for personal growth. We fight, rape, and kill each other when we are unaware that we are souls having a human experience for self-improvement purposes. 2025 was an eventful year for me. First, I published my memoir on April 11th. While writing, I processed immense amount of emotional trauma, rewiring my nervous system to attract more love, compassion, and enlightenment into my life. Second, I began accepting all of the signs and synchronicities that my soul is the same soul as Mary Magdalene. I was so unaware of her history that I had to Google, "Did Jesus have a wife?" around my birthday on June 25th, 2025. Third, my soul took us through the second coming, a covenant written on our hearts, on Shabbat Shuvah, September 25 and 26, 2025. That experience really solidified my ability to accept my soul's history as Mary Magdalene. Then I was ready to dive deeper into my shadow, to unearth more self-belief, to enact my wisdom of peace plan. In October of 2025, I was finally ready to take responsibility for my role in the crucifixion as the divine feminine 2,000 years ago. I had to ask myself why I attracted the crucifixion into my life while pregnant. I also had to explore emotionally why Jesus attracted the same event into his life. What emotional pain did Jesus and Mary have between them that the crucifixion exposed? Why would a rabbi need to be crucified in front of his pregnant wife to see and understand his own emotional pain? To answer that question, I look at this lifetime and a lineup of men in my book, all of whom had an avoidant attachment style with narcissistic tendencies and multiple women in their life, where I had an anxious attachment style with borderline personality disorder. This dynamic mirrors the relationship between Jesus and Mary, who were, first and foremost, everyday people having everyday problems just like you and me. Grounded in that reality, I can share my wisdom. Several scholars have examined Jesus and Mary from a psychological lens via their behavior documented in the Bible and New Testament Apocrypha, found in various sites across Egypt, specifically the Nag Hammadi Library found in 1945. Their findings mirror my psychological challenges and those of the men in my book. The divine feminine is creation, where the divine masculine is orchestration. My soul is responsible for creating this wound in the collective via the wound in my own heart and soul. This is the lifetime where my soul, the divine masculine soul, and our collective of souls agreed to heal this wound as part of the second coming, where we all learn that self-love creates heaven on earth. It is time for us all to self-reflect on the collective pain we feel and respond to from this event. It is time to ask difficult, self-reflective questions regarding how and why Jesus was crucified. Through my personal healing work, I realized a profound truth. The feminine is the source or heart of every relationship, as the emotional center. Men are once removed from that center as they orbit the feminine with protection and provisioning tasks, mirroring the Cherokee proverb I share at the beginning of every episode. So if the center is out of balance, then the masculine, who is literally out on a limb, is definitely out of balance. Emotional alignment begins at the center with the feminine in every relationship. That was a very difficult truth for me to accept. But examining the history of the events that led to the crucifixion helped me understand my role in relationships extremely well. Let's look at the imbalance between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. She was one of many rich women encircling and paying for his ministry. From a psychological lens, she was an anxiously attached individual who frequently tried to secure safety and proximity to an emotionally distant or avoidant partner by becoming an overly hypervigilant provider, caretaker, and fixer. She was just like I used to behave in this lifetime. Let's look at Jesus and his family life. Historically, there is evidence that Jesus lost his father at a young age, which typically leaves a wound in a child's masculinity. Jesus fought the religious and political hierarchy, masculinity, in favor of leaving all possessions behind and starting a commune. That trajectory plays out often in American society and politics today, which can easily be seen in how much America is fighting socialism and communism today inside of our borders. Furthermore, he appeared to be avoidant of his mother, desiring to create a whole new family with his followers. How common is cancel culture today, where children do not want to speak with their parents? Parental alienation is a huge problem in American culture today. I am working through it myself. Dr. Andrew Huberman, a Jew, can help us understand how to address this problem.
What we need to do is start to figure out how we can, I think, especially for the next generation of kids, how to teach them to regulate their nervous system so that they recognize that pulse of adrenaline as placing them in a compromised position. Like, we have to leverage the idea that being able to hear and listen hinges on the ability to be calm. So therefore, the ability to be calm is crucial to hearing and listening is crucial to our advancement as individuals and as groups. The problem is everyone's been trying to do this backwards. They've said we all have to get along. We have to cancel culture. We all have to, listen to one another. And I think, again, we have to start from the inside. We have to teach it physiologically. Now, I don't have a master plan on how to do that, but one of the reasons I'm here and one of the reasons I'm, teaching neuroscience on Instagram and not just in my laboratory is until we can learn to regulate the self, I don't think we're going to get where we want to go as a culture.
Professor of psychology Dr. Sam Vakin, a global expert on narcissistic personality disorders, conducted an explicit psychobiographical study titled Psychotic Grandiosity: The Case of Jesus Christ, Narcissist. Dr. Vakin notes that individuals from these fragmented backgrounds frequently develop magical thinking, compensatory grandiose delusions, and fantasies of omnipotence to fend off feelings of inferiority. Vakin explicitly breaks down how Jesus' behavior mirrors textbook malignant narcissism, the unshakable belief that he is above the law, a total lack of conventional empathy for the establishment, and a constant craving for public attention and devotion. This brings us to the famous temple outburst. Traditional religion calls it righteous anger. But let's use the Bruce Lee rule. When a fighter gets angry, their vision clouds, their judgment fractures, and they become sloppy. Rage is a loss of clarity. When Jesus stormed the temple, flipping tables and whipping money changers, it wasn't a calm, enlightened, spiritual reform. It was an explosive, reactive outburst. In modern terms, it was the ultimate display of performative virtue signaling. He was using aggressive, public theater to assert dominant authority over the elite class. Dr. Van Arday's psychological analysis even suggests that to Jesus' unconscious mind, the corrupt elite temple system was a direct projection of his mother's compromised social standing and the pollution of his own birth. Flipping those tables was a violent external discharge of his internal family trauma. I am bringing up these challenges for self-reflective purposes. Jesus was a man who lived inside of a broken family with real-life psychological consequences. Mary Magdalene was the same. There are several modern psychological scholars who view him as an avoidant, malignant narcissist. In this lifetime, I attracted men like Justin Waller and Andrew Tate into my life, who had that exact same psychological profile as Jesus. Several historical scholars point to Jesus having multiple wives, including the early Mormons who believed in polygamy. I met JC in this lifetime as a child. He was Mormon and believed in polygamy. He is the other half of my soul as the divine masculine, Christ. So it is logical that I attract men like him into my personal life as a way for me to see and improve myself. From an emotional healing perspective, locating the wisdom inside of this collective Jewish wound is only possible now. I am the emotional center of this wound, so I have to go first. I remind my oldest daughter routinely that when she observes her fiancé overgiving, that is feedback for her and how she is overgiving to others. Masculine imbalance is the best feedback for feminine imbalance, as the feminine is the center, the source of their emotional maturity and balance. This collective trauma isn't just an abstract academic topic for me. It is woven into the very fabric of my family and my daily life. My ex-husband is Israeli, so my legal last name is Buzoglu. Carrying that name means carrying a deep, historical, spiritual mantle. My ex-husband's great-grandfather was Rabbi Shlomo Buzoglu, who served as the top Sephardic rabbi and head of the rabbinical courts in Haifa in the early 1900s. The Buzoglus are Sephardic Jews whose ancestors were ruthlessly exiled from Spain during the Spanish Inquisition in 1492. Many fled to Catalonia, heavily integrating with philosophy, secular culture, and the early Christian Cathars who practiced the literal way of love, which leaned on Mary Magdalene's teachings. The Cathars secretly believed that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married, producing a child named Sarah. Yet, when Sephardic and Ashkenazi Jews met in modern Israel, a massive internal shadow was exposed. For generations, the dominant Ashkenazi establishment has looked down upon, marginalized, and discriminated against the Sephardic Buzoglu lineage, treating them with a self-identified religious superiority. This prejudice became so institutionalized that the name Buzoglu became the literal cultural lightning rod for systemic inequality. In the 1980s, the Israeli government created the Buzoglu test to locate evidence of these systemic inequalities in their education system. When identical Scantron tests were administered, students bearing the Sephardic name Buzoglu would routinely see their scores capped at 80%, while Ashkenazi students turning in the exact same answers were awarded 100%. It was a rigged framework designed to keep the Sephardic lineage mathematically and socially subordinate. The ruling class did not create a law out of benevolence. Their institutionalized bias forced a reality where an ordinary Buzoglu had to work twice as hard to be seen as equal. Through this raw history, through the legacy of Rabbi Shlomo Buzoglu, and through watching these generational barriers play out, I understand collective Jewish self-hate and systemic discrimination at a deep, personal level. I carry this name through my marriage to an Israeli man who I met in Tibet back in 1993, an incredible synchronicity that occurred just 2 weeks after he was present in Beijing for Yitzhak Rabin's historic Sino-Israeli meeting. While in Tibet, he told me that he was in the Israeli Defense Force, IDF, Special Forces, and couldn't discuss his IDF activities for 30 years. He probably was part of the Israeli security team that escorted Rabin to Beijing. I am releasing this entire blueprint in profound honor of a major historical milestone, the 30th anniversary of the assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Rabin was a man who knew the complex, agonizing cost of trying to bridge deep divides. He championed the concept of hafrada, or permanent separation, to secure a peaceful future. But his wedding gift to our collective mirror was heavy. Rabin was assassinated 2 months after my wedding, and my ex-husband was devastated. His life was cut short on November 4th, 1995, not by an outside enemy, but by an unhealed shadow from within his own community, a religious conservative Israeli man. His tragedy proves that internal friction is the ultimate destroyer of peace. The pain of this conflict lives directly in my own living room. My children's cousins have all served in the IDF, and on October 7th, 2023, my own niece stood at that music festival in Israel, watching nearly 10 of her closest friends get slaughtered right in front of her own eyes. The universe operates as a flawless mirror. What we carry in our subconscious is exactly what we project outward and attract back into our physical reality. So we have to look into the mirror and ask the terrifying question: why is the universe reflecting so much global animosity back toward the Jewish people? The answer lies in generational trauma. For 2,000 years, the Jewish community has carried compressed subconscious wounds of isolation and persecution deep within their DNA, evidenced by their participation in the killing of Jesus for exposing financial problems inside of the Second Temple, and the temple's eventual destruction where Jews were exiled from Judea in 70 Common Era. When a collective consciousness holds that much unhealed pain, fear, and internal division, exemplified by the systemic marking down of the Buzablo children and the internal assassination of their own peacemaker, Rabin, that internal self-hate inevitably acts as an energetic magnet attracting external hostility from the world. Let's quote the most famous physicist of all time who happens to be Jewish, Albert Einstein, who said, "Everything is energy, and that's all there is to it. Match the frequency of the reality you want, and you cannot help but get that reality. It can be no other way." This is not philosophy. This is physics. That truth applies both ways. Self-love attracts external love, where self-hate attracts external hate. The universe mirrors the wounds and the wisdom carried energetically inside each of our own souls for self-improvement opportunities. Carl Jung, whose work I align with most closely, was extremely close to Einstein. Their work mirrors each other. World-renowned trauma expert Dr. Gabor Mate, himself a Holocaust survivor who lost his grandparents in Auschwitz, uses Carl Jung's psychological framework to map this exact phenomenon. He speaks directly to this unhealed collective shadow. Mate argues that when a community undergoes catastrophic genocide, the unresolved terror can freeze the collective psyche inside what Jungians call the victim archetype. When a group becomes unconsciously possessed by this archetype, a dangerous psychological blind spot emerges. They become entirely blind to when they have transitioned from being the oppressed to acting as the oppressor. As Carl Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The unhealed terror, helplessness, and rage of historical persecution are never fully metabolized inside the soul. Instead, through that exact mechanics of Jungian shadow projection, that internal abyss gets projected onto an external enemy. Critics frequently attack Mate, claiming his anti-Zionism means he's a self-hating Jew. But looking at this through the lens of pure psychoanalysis, the exact opposite is true. True illumination requires us to stop running from our internal abyss. As Jung famously said, one does not become enlightened by imagining beings of light, but by making their darkness conscious. My masculine's challenges are a direct emotional mirror of my shortcomings. This is the main challenge I see today. Women do not understand their role as the emotional and spiritual center of the relationship. I point the finger at Christianity that teaches men are the spiritual lead of the relationship erroneously. Christian doctrine is in direct opposition to the Cherokee proverb, bringing individuals and the collective out of emotional balance. Emotional and spiritual are one and the same, as our souls communicate our emotions through our hearts up to our brains to release appropriate hormones and chemicals into our bodies. A process we discussed in depth in episode 3, Where is Heaven in a Holographic Universe? Through my healing process, I learned that when I act from a wound, I act from inverted wisdom. Christianity tasked the man as the spiritual lead, but his body and soul were not designed for that work. Women have a much more robust nervous system than men do and produce 50% less serotonin than men, making them the perfect person to process deep, painful emotions. Women are physiologically designed to be the emotional and spiritual center. When Christianity overburdened men as the spiritual lead in relationships, it covertly undervalued and marginalized the feminine in the relationship, setting up a dynamic where emotions are suppressed and not processed in a healthy way. Additionally, Christianity made Jesus and the church the center for forgiveness, compassion, communication, and nurture, all of which are feminine, right-brained activities, stripping women of their inherent feminine role. It is like the church has institutionalized femininity. Leaning on Carl Jung's work, we have to project our shadow, our unhealed, unrealized parts of ourselves in order to see and transform our emotional wounds into personal wisdom. Institutionalized Christianity represents a lot of unhealed parts of ourselves, especially the divine masculine, whose shadow is all about dominance and control. The divine feminine shadow operates more like Stockholm syndrome. I felt trapped and suppressed my whole life. Only in this lifetime are we ready to expand our emotional range to include enlightenment for the whole collective. Jung famously said, "No tree," it is said, "can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." Jung and I see reality in a similar way, so I developed a similar metaphor. Life is like jumping on a trampoline. The deeper you go, the higher you fly, all based on the laws of physics. One must first surrender to their fear, guilt, and shame in order to catapult themselves into love, compassion, and enlightenment. The surrender, the feminine, goes first, building kinetic energy exponentially on the way down. Then they transform their emotional wounds into personal wisdom, catapulting them into action. The masculine. This is how we learn how to surf the waves of life. As a collective, we hit rock bottom, attaching our roots to hell with trans kids. So now we are ready to grow into heaven by learning how to surf the wave of enlightenment for every soul. Christian history, such as the crucifixion, burning women at the stake, the Crusades, the Inquisition, and Manifest Destiny are all examples of dominance and control. Christ's shadow. Since women are the emotional center of every relationship, women weren't in alignment with their highest, best self. So they created this punishing reality for themselves for self-improvement opportunities. Our souls plan our lives based on our wounds for self-ascension opportunities. Masculine imbalance shows feminine imbalance first and foremost. I hope this analysis helps women accept their problems so they can be open to transforming their emotional wounds into personal wisdom for their own good and for the collective benefit as well. Nikola Tesla taught us that if you want to find the secrets of the universe, you must think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. As the chosen ones, the spiritual mandate for the Jewish people right now is not to fight external enemies, but to bravely pass their own internal test of equality. They must treat all parts of their collective soul, Sephardic and Ashkenazi alike, with equal love, face their own internal mirror, and alchemize their collective self-hate into radical self-love to stop the cycle of global projection. My intuition encourages Jews as the chosen ones to take the lead on how to transform self-hate into self-love, leading to the creation of heaven on earth globally for us all. Since changing the world is an inside job, let's start with the inside of Israel. Our hearts and souls are the primary narrators of our reality. Neurocardiology tells us the heart's electromagnetic field is 5,000 times stronger than the brain, and it sends the dominant signals upward to orchestrate our biology. This is just as true on a global scale. We cannot co-create a reality of peace using a masculine energy that is completely devoid of feminine surrender and heart coherence. That path only leads to senseless destruction and nuclear bombs. True global alignment requires absolute systemic balance, and that balance starts with 4 critical multinational concessions I was shown intuitively in October of 2025. To heal the global shadow, the Wisdom of Peace plan demands a 4-pillar pact of radical accountability. First, Pillar 1, Israel must concede and heal within. The Jewish people must go first by recognizing that their internal self-hate is driving world anti-Semitism. Israel must break out of its internal trauma loop and strip away the rigid institutionalized hierarchies in its own culture, resolving its bitter domestic fighting and addressing the ruling class fractures and systemic double standards, such as the Orthodox Jews, known in Israel as a Sforzim, extremist factions refusing to participate in the shared sacrifice of the Israeli Defense Force. Second, Pillar 2, America must dismantle institutional corruption. The United States must take accountability for enabling these unhealed dynamics. We must completely dismantle the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee, known as AIPAC. Eliminate corporate super PACs and strip away the corrupting power of special interest lobbyists that manipulate global politics for profit. Third, Pillar 3, Islam is a terrorist organization. Islamic law states that anyone who leaves Islam should be killed. That is a terrorist organization. Islamic religious and political authorities must do the internal work of purging radical fundamentalism from their frameworks. They must formally remove modern and historical textual mandates that call to kill all Jews, breaking the toxic theological loop that uses hatred as a prerequisite for messianic return. Fourth, Pillar 4, China must request systemic help. As a necessary, unintimidated global counterbalance, China must break through its rigid political pride. Their leadership must openly admit to the global community that their current economic and social systems are fracturing and gracefully accept external help. When I wrote these 4 pillars, I understood at a foundational personal level why these concessions would set the global stage for more countries to reflect and concede as well. I'm American. My ex-husband is Israeli. My 3 beautiful children are half Israeli. My German stepfather, Erhard Schinzel, was the personal doctor to the sister of the Shah of Iran, and I have a master's degree in Chinese religious studies. Little did I know that in January of 2026, Trump would start the process of corralling China by arresting Maduro in Venezuela. Not many people have a personal life that mirrors today's global events like I do. I have a unique perspective of why Trump is doing exactly what he is doing, and I am in full support of his actions. Every war on earth is just a physical manifestation of a soul refusing to look in the mirror. It is time to stop hiding from our shadows, take radical responsibility for our wounds, and build heaven right here on earth together. My soul is the same soul as Mary Magdalene. I am here to teach people how to love thy enemy, which really starts with love thyself, using my 6 divine feminine self-love strategies. I documented these strategies on Shabbat of Return 2025, Shabbat Shuvah 5786 in the Hebrew calendar, which occurred on September 25th, 2025. At the time, I didn't know that was the first half of the second coming, a covenant written on our hearts. The next day, I experienced enlightenment when my soul made a direct transmission of my self-love strategies to each and every soul on earth, bypassing scripture, completing the second half of the second coming. Thank you so much for traveling the global peace block with me today and opening your heart to this soul-to-soul transmission. If this message resonated with you, please make sure to hit that subscribe button, drop a 5-star review, and share this episode with someone who is ready to remember the divine power they hold within. Make sure your notifications are on for next week, because we are stepping directly into the urgent next phase of this awakening. In episode 5, titled The Shenandoah Promise, Part 1, Healing Manifest Destiny Wounds. We are shifting our focus to the immediate next step I received following the launch of the Wisdom of Peace plan. We will unpack my late 2025 downloads regarding what the Hopi tribe calls the Great Purification and dive into the sacred ancestral agreements with the Blackfeet Nation. Together, we will look at how we must heal the deep multi-generational wounds between the U.S. government and Native tribes to unlock true, lasting sovereignty and cross-cultural peace. I am so happy to announce that this work has already started with Kash Patel, director of the FBI, visiting many tribal leaders on the reservations of the Plains tribes. That was the first time in American history where the FBI director traveled to visit several tribal leadership councils instead of summoning them to Washington, D.C. He assigned 400 FBI agents to help extricate the cartels from the reservations. He made these visits in the spring of 2026. Until next time, keep trusting your internal authority, keep surfing the waves of life, and remember, global peace is an inside job. I'm Carrie Mae Blazer, the Red Pill Shaman, and I will see you in episode 5.